Welcome to Johnny Carson Files. There are exactly 6 copies of the original Breakfast at Tiffany's screenplay still in existence. 5 are in archives. 1 is in a glass case at the Academy Museum in Los Angeles. And if you look closely at the last page of that 6th copy, you will find 17 words, written in a hand the world has not seen in over 60 years. 17 words that explain everything. And when Audrey Hepburn carried those 17 words onto Johnny Carson's stage on the night of April the 14th, 1975, she did something that no one in that studio had ever seen her do before. But before we get to that moment, before we tell you what those words were, we need to go back to a Tuesday morning in 1960, a bungalow on the Paramount Pictures lot, where the most famous woman in the world read a script, made a decision that would change the course of cinema history, and never explained why. Before we begin, I often see comments from people who did not realize they were not subscribed. If you enjoy the channel, please take a second to check and make sure you are subscribed. It is free, and it really helps us keep the show growing. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. The envelope arrived at Audrey Hepburn's home in Switzerland on the 3rd of March, 1975. It was a manila envelope, battered at the corners, with a New York postmark and no return address. Her housekeeper brought it in with the morning mail and set it on the kitchen table next to her coffee. Audrey looked at it for a moment. Then she set down her cup and opened it. Inside was a screenplay. 117 pages, slightly yellowed at the edges, the spiral binding worn loose on one side. The cover page read, "Breakfast at Tiffany's." Screenplay by George Axelrod, based on the novel by Truman Capote, Paramount Pictures, 1960. And in the lower right corner, stamped in red ink, 2 letters, M.M. Audrey Hepburn sat at her kitchen table for 2 hours and did not move. She had played Holly Golightly in 1961. The role had become the defining performance of her career. The Little Black Dress, Moon River, The Cat with No Name. These images had become inseparable from her. The way certain performances become inseparable from certain actors, fused by something larger than craft, something that feels like inevitability. She had always believed she got the role because the studio wanted her, because George Axelrod believed in her, because Blake Edwards believed in her. She had always thought it had simply been the right fit, at the right moment, the kind of thing that happens in Hollywood, when all the stars align. She had never known that someone else was offered the role first. She had never known that someone else turned it down. And she had never, not once in 15 years, known why. But, as she turned through those yellowed pages that Tuesday morning in Switzerland, she began to understand. Because in the margins, on almost every page, there was handwriting. A slanted, slightly childlike cursive, pressed hard into the paper, the pen marks going slightly through in places. Underlinings, question marks, small stars drawn next to certain lines of dialogue. And in the margins, notes. Notes written by a woman who had read this screenplay and felt it in her bones. The notes were not critical. They were not the marks of an actress working through her beats and her cues. They were something more private than that. They were the notes of someone having a conversation with the page. On page 12, next to a line of Holly's dialogue, the handwriting described the character not as written, but as understood from the inside. On page 34, next to the scene where Holly throws a party she does not want to be at, just 3 words, "This is every night." On page 67, next to the scene where Holly talks about not belonging anywhere, 1 word, circled 3 times. Yes, Audrey read all 117 pages. When she reached the last page, the handwriting changed. It became slower, more deliberate. And there at the bottom of that last page, below the final scene description, in handwriting that was steadier and larger than the margin notes, were the 17 words that Audrey Hepburn would carry with her onto Carson's stage 6 weeks later. But what you have not been told yet, what nobody in that studio on the night of April the 14th knew, was what had happened on a Tuesday morning 15 years earlier. In a bungalow on the Paramount lot, in the spring of 1960, when the most famous woman in the world read these exact same pages for the first time. And what nobody knew was that it started not in 1960, but 3 years before that. On a night in September of 1957, that both women had kept entirely private for the rest of their lives. Wait, do not miss this detail, because what happened on that September night is the key to everything. It is the thing that explains every decision that came after, and it happened in a place no one would have expected. September of 1957, Beverly Hills Hotel, a party that was, by all accounts, indistinguishable from every other party in Hollywood that season. Someone's birthday. someone's deal closing, someone's excuse to fill 3 rooms with people who needed to be seen being seen together. The rooms smelled like gardenias and cigarette smoke and expensive things. The music came from a quartet in the corner of the ballroom, who had been playing for 2 hours without anyone listening. Marilyn Monroe was there. She was always somewhere. That was the arrangement she had made with the world, after Some Like It Hot, after The Prince and the Showgirl, after the years of grinding through parts that were beneath her until the parts worthy of her finally arrived. Be everywhere, be luminous, be exactly what everyone needs you to be. She had gotten very good at it. She had gotten so good at it that she sometimes stood in a room full of 200 people who adored her and felt nothing at all. She was 31 years old that September. From the outside, everything was exactly right. The career was ascending. The marriage to Arthur Miller, begun with such extraordinary public attention just 14 months before, was still intact. The photographs showed a woman who had somehow figured out the impossible thing, how to be incandescent and accessible at the same time, how to make every person in a room feel the smile was only for them. The photographs were not lying, but they were not showing everything. Audrey Hepburn was also at the party that night. She was less comfortable in these rooms than Marilyn was. She had never learned the easy warmth of the Hollywood circuit, the way certain people could make small talk feel like genuine intimacy. She had grown up in occupied Holland during the war, learning early that survival required a certain economy of expression, that you kept the real things inside and offered the surface carefully. She was 28 years old. Roman Holiday was 4 years behind her. She had won the Oscar. She was by every external measure at the beginning of something extraordinary. And yet she stood near walls at parties. She found the quietest corner of any room and stayed there watching. They had never properly met. They had been in the same rooms before, at the same industry events, at the same studio functions. They had been discussed in the same articles, as representatives of 2 different but equally compelling versions of what a woman could be on screen. But they had never been introduced. They had never looked directly at each other. On this particular September evening, they found each other in a bathroom. Marilyn Monroe had slipped away from the party at 9:47 in the evening, 18 minutes after arriving. She was not ill. She was not hiding from anyone in particular. She simply needed a moment away from the performance. She sat on the edge of the bathtub with her shoes in her hands and the noise of the party muffled behind the door, and she did nothing. Just sat, breathed. That was all she needed sometimes. 3 minutes of not being Marilyn Monroe. The door opened. Audrey Hepburn walked in, registered that the bathroom was occupied, said the automatic apology, and began to back out. Then she stopped. Because Marilyn Monroe was sitting on the edge of the bathtub with her shoes in her hands, not crying, not distressed, just sitting, with an expression on her face that Audrey had never seen in any photograph or on any screen. An expression of pure, unguarded exhaustion. The face of someone who had been performing for a very long time and had not quite remembered to put the performance back on before the door opened. Audrey did not back out of the bathroom. She did not ask if Marilyn was all right. She did not offer the automatic expressions of concern that Marilyn had learned to deflect reflexively. She simply closed the door behind her, looked around the bathroom for a moment, and then sat down on the tile floor with her back against the wall. She took off her own shoes. She set them next to her. She said nothing at all. For 4 full minutes, neither of them said a word. And then Marilyn Monroe said something unexpected. She told Audrey there was something she hated about her. One specific thing, that Audrey looked exactly like who she actually was. And then, after a pause, she said something else, something quieter, that she had been performing herself for so long, she could no longer find the person underneath. Audrey was still for a moment. And then, very simply, she told Marilyn to stop performing, just for that night, because nobody, she said, was watching. And Marilyn Monroe laughed. Not the famous laugh. Not the performance of delight that had appeared in 1,000 photographs and 36 films. A real laugh. Surprised out of her, the kind that makes a person cover their mouth because it is too large and too genuine for a public space. And then she laughed again. And Audrey laughed too. And for a few seconds they were just 2 women in a hotel bathroom, laughing at something that was not quite a joke, but was funnier than any joke that had been told in the rooms outside. What happened next has never been told until now. Because what those 2 women talked about in that bathroom, for the next 42 minutes, was something neither of them ever described publicly. The party continued outside. Nobody came looking. The quartet played on without an audience. And in a hotel bathroom with the lights on and the door locked, 2 women who had both built elaborate public selves over private wreckage talked to each other like people who had nothing to prove. Audrey talked about her childhood in the Netherlands during the German occupation, things she had never said in an interview, the particular kind of hunger she remembered, the way silence became a skill when silence was the only safe option, the way she had learned to read a room before entering it, to assess the danger level before committing to presence, and how that had never entirely left her, even in rooms where there was no danger at all. Marilyn talked about being a child who was moved from foster home to foster home, about the particular arithmetic of learning which version of yourself each new household wanted you to be, about the way that skill, the ability to become what the room needed, was both the thing that had saved her and the thing that had slowly unmade her. She said she had gotten so good at being what people wanted, she could no longer always tell the difference between what they wanted and what she actually was. And Audrey said it again, the same thing she had said before. Nobody is watching, just you, just here. They stayed for 42 minutes. When they finally emerged and went back to the party, they did not make a thing of it. There was no dramatic scene. They simply re-entered separately at different moments and returned to being who they were supposed to be. They did not exchange numbers. They did not make plans. They did not, for the rest of that evening, speak to each other again. But what you have seen so far is nothing compared to what happened in the weeks that followed. Marilyn Monroe went home that night and wrote something down. She wrote down what Audrey had said to her, exactly as it had been said. She wrote it in the back of a notebook she kept on her nightstand. She did not tell anyone about the evening. She did not tell her analyst, though she told her analyst nearly everything. She kept it private, the way you keep something private when it matters too much to expose it to language. She did not see Audrey again. In March of 1960, 2.5 years later, a script arrived at Marilyn Monroe's bungalow on the Paramount lot. She read it that same morning. She read it slowly, the way she read things when they were landing, when something in the words was opening a door she had not known was there. She underlined. She made margin notes. She sat with 117 pages and felt for perhaps the first time in years that she understood a character in a way that went beyond technique. Holly Golightly. A woman who had invented herself so thoroughly that the original person was almost gone. A woman who was terrified of belonging because belonging meant being known, and being known meant being trapped. A woman who laughed too easily at parties and cried when no one was watching. A woman who had given herself a new name, and a new accent, and a new apartment, and still could not quite convince herself that any of it was real. Marilyn recognized every scene. She recognized every silence between the lines. And this is where the story takes the turn that no one expected. When Marilyn reached page 34, the scene where Holly throws a party she does not want to be at, she stopped reading and wrote 3 words in the margin. This is every night. When she reached page 67, the scene where Holly says she does not know where she belongs, she circled it 3 times and wrote a single word beside it. Yes. When she reached page 89, the scene where Holly talks about the thing she wants most being the thing she is most afraid of, Marilyn put the script face down on the table. She got up. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, looking at the Paramount lot in the early morning light, the sound stages and the backlot streets and the distant towers of the city. She was thinking about a hotel bathroom, about a woman sitting on a tile floor with her shoes off, not asking if she was all right, not offering anything, just being present. About 5 words that had landed like something physical. Nobody is watching. Just you. Just here. Just here. When Marilyn came back to the script, she read the final 28 pages without stopping. When she reached the end, she sat for several minutes before picking up a pen. What she wrote at the bottom of that last page was not a production note. It was not addressed to anyone. It was simply 17 words that had arrived at the bottom of 117 pages of someone else's story and landed there like a private conclusion that had been coming for a long time. When her manager called the next morning and asked what she thought, Marilyn was quiet for a moment, and then she gave him an instruction he had not expected. She told him to give the role to Audrey Hepburn. Her manager pushed back. He reminded her that Truman Capote had demanded her personally, that he had threatened to pull his name from the picture if anyone else was cast. He told her this was one of the best female roles of the decade. Marilyn let him finish, and then she explained quietly and without hesitation that Holly Golightly had to be played by someone who knew who she was, even when everything around her was wrong. Someone who was real underneath it all. Not performing real, actually real. She told him she had spent 15 years perfecting the illusion of authenticity, and that Audrey Hepburn had never needed the illusion because she had never lost the original. Give it to her, she said. That is where it belongs. Her manager wrote in his notes that afternoon. Mem declined Tiffany's. Personal reasons. He called Paramount and cited scheduling conflicts. He put the marked-up script in a manila envelope, wrote the initials on the corner in red ink, and filed it in a cabinet in his New York office. He never told anyone else. The role was offered to Audrey Hepburn 10 days later. She accepted immediately. Breakfast at Tiffany's was released in October of 1961. It became one of the most beloved films in the history of American cinema. The image of Audrey Hepburn as Holly Golightly, in the black Givenchy dress, standing outside the jewelry store window at dawn, eating a pastry and watching something she could not afford to want, became one of the most reproduced images of the 20th century. The film was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. Moon River won. The little black dress became the most famous dress in film history. The role became so thoroughly associated with Audrey Hepburn that it was impossible to imagine anyone else in it, impossible to believe it had ever been anything other than inevitable. Marilyn Monroe saw the film at a private screening in November of 1961. She watched it alone. When it was over, she sat in the screening room for a long time before the projectionist finally came in to check on her. She told him the actress was perfect. Exactly right. 9 months later, Marilyn Monroe was dead. She was 36 years old. She had never told Audrey. She had never told anyone. The marked-up script sat in a filing cabinet in a New York office building for 15 years, while the world wrote about Audrey Hepburn and Holly Golightly, as if the connection between them had been foreordained, as if no other possibility had ever existed. And in a way it had been foreordained, just not in the way anyone understood. The manager who had kept the secret died in January of 1975. A quiet death, unreported in the entertainment press, and in the weeks after his death, his assistant began the work of clearing his office, filing cabinet by filing cabinet, box by box. 15 years of the accumulated paper of a life spent navigating the most document-heavy business in the world. She found the envelope in the third cabinet, third drawer from the top. She recognized the initials. She opened it. She read the first page, then the second. Then she sat down at the desk and read all 117 pages, the margin notes, the underlinings, the circled passages. When she reached the last page, when she read the 17 words at the bottom, she understood immediately what she was holding. She sent the envelope to Audrey Hepburn without explanation. No cover letter, no note, just the script in its original envelope, forwarded to an address she obtained through the studio. She did not hear back. She did not expect to. Wait, do not miss what this means. Because the woman who was about to walk onto Carson's stage on the night of April the 14th had been carrying this for 6 weeks. She had sat with it in her kitchen in Switzerland and read it and not told anyone. She had traveled to New York with it in a bag. She had sat in her hotel room the night before the broadcast and read those 17 words one more time, and she had decided that the only place for this particular truth was a stage, because some truths are too large for a private room. Some debts can only be paid in public. April the 14th, 1975. NBC Studios, Burbank. The Tonight Show, taping at 5:30 in the afternoon for broadcast at 11:30 that night. The studio audience of 320 people was already in their seats when the pre-show warm-up began. The show that evening had 2 scheduled guests before Audrey Hepburn. She was the final guest of the night, which in the economy of The Tonight Show usually meant the shortest segment, 12 minutes, 15 at most. That is not what happened. Audrey Hepburn arrived at the studio at 4:15, an hour and 15 minutes before the taping began. The makeup artist noted that she carried a manila envelope into the makeup chair with her and kept it on her lap throughout. The stage manager noted that when he walked her to the green room, she was quieter than guests usually were. Not nervous, not distracted, just very, very still, the way still water is still before something moves under it. At 5:25, 5 minutes before taping, Johnny Carson's producer came to the green room and asked Audrey what she wanted to talk about, whether there was anything she wanted to promote, anything she wanted to avoid. She looked at the manila envelope in her lap. She told him only that she had something she needed to give back, and that she would explain when she got out there. The producer started to ask a follow-up question. Then he looked at her face and decided not to. The show began at 5:30 exactly. 2 guests went first. The monologue landed cleanly. The studio was warm and loose, and the audience was responding well. Johnny Carson was in the form he was always in when the room was cooperating. Precise and quick and slightly dangerous, the way a good comedian is slightly dangerous, always a half beat ahead of where the audience expected him to be. At 6:47, Ed McMahon introduced her. He called her a woman, who had given the world so much beauty that the debt was incalculable, and he asked the audience to welcome Miss Audrey Hepburn. The studio audience rose to their feet. Every single person. Audrey walked out from the wings in a fitted black dress, the manila envelope held at her side the way you carry something you have been instructed to deliver carefully, and the applause did not diminish as she crossed the stage. It continued while she shook Carson's hand. It continued while she sat down in the guest chair. Carson let it run. He did not cut it short. Some arrivals deserve more than the standard 8 seconds of applause. When the room finally quieted, Carson leaned forward and acknowledged the envelope. She told him she had been carrying it for 6 weeks and that it was time for it to be somewhere other than with her. She set it on the desk. She opened it carefully, the way you handle something fragile. She removed the script. She placed it between them, cover page visible to the cameras. Carson read the title. He read the initials in the lower right corner. He went very still. He asked where it had come from. She explained, quietly and methodically, the death of the manager, the assistant who had cleared the office, the envelope that arrived at her home in March without explanation. She told him that in 15 years, she had never known, that she had always believed the role found her through the ordinary machinery of the industry, through the studio wanting her, through the people making the picture believing in her. She had not known there was a decision. She had not known someone had chosen. Carson observed quietly that Marilyn Monroe had turned down what may have been the defining role of her generation and told no one why. Audrey confirmed it. She added that the manager had kept it. He had kept the notes and the script and brought them with him through 15 years of life, and when he died, the script had finally found its way to her. Carson asked if she knew why Marilyn had done it. Audrey was still for a moment. Then she said she thought she did, and that there was something else she had not told anyone, something she had not understood the significance of until she read what was written on the last page. She lifted the script. She turned to the last page. She held it toward Carson and let him read it himself. He read it once. He read it again. He set the script down carefully. He looked at the camera. He looked at the audience. He looked at his hands. When he finally looked back at Audrey, something had changed in his expression. The professional ease he brought to every broadcast was still there, but something underneath it had shifted, the way the floor of a room shifts when someone says something true enough to change the density of the air. He asked her to read it aloud, to the people watching. Audrey looked down at the page. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she read the 17 words that Marilyn Monroe had written at the bottom of page 117 in the spring of 1960, alone in a bungalow on the Paramount lot. The words were, "Holly is Audrey. Holly has always been Audrey. I know who I am enough to know that." The studio did not applaud. Not because the audience was unmoved, because some things, when they are spoken in public, land too precisely for applause. Applause is a response to performance. This was not a performance. This was something private, carried for 15 years, that had finally arrived at the place where it could be said. Carson's jaw was tight. He pressed one hand flat against the desk. He looked at the script, and then at Audrey, and then he said it plainly, that Marilyn had seen something in her, something she believed she had lost in herself. Audrey pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth. She looked away for a moment. When she looked back, her eyes were wet, but her expression was composed. The composure of someone who has been practicing for this conversation for 6 weeks and has decided that being precise about it is more important than being undone by it. She told Carson they had met once, properly, just once, in 1957, at a party. She said they had found themselves in the same bathroom. There were no cameras, she said. No one came looking. They talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with any of it. Carson asked what had been said. Audrey looked at her hands. She explained that Marilyn had told her she had been performing herself for so long she could not find herself anymore, and that she, Audrey, had told Marilyn to stop performing, just for that night, because nobody was watching. The silence in the studio deepened. Audrey looked at the script. She told Carson that Marilyn was quoting that conversation in what she had written, that she had gone home from that party and turned it into something, and that she had made it into a decision about this role. She had taken what was said in a bathroom in 1957 and turned it into a gift that had defined Audrey's entire career. And, she said, she had not known. For 15 years, she had not known. Carson was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of the professional ease that normally governed him. He said that Marilyn had given her the role because she believed Audrey was more equipped to carry what Holly needed to carry, and that she had made that decision without announcement, without credit, without any expectation of being thanked. Audrey confirmed it. She added that Marilyn had been dead before the film was even released. Carson reached across, lifted the script, and turned not to the last page, but to page 67. He found the circled passage. He found the single word in the margin. He held the script up toward the camera so the audience could see the handwriting, the circles, the pressure of the pen through the paper. He read the passage aloud. He read the margin note. Then he turned to page 34 and read that one too. He put the script down. He looked at Audrey and told her what he saw. That Marilyn had read every word of that script and felt it, and that she had decided the person who could carry it from the inside out was not her. It was Audrey. He said he had been doing this job for 13 years, and he had never seen an act of generosity quite like that. Audrey Hepburn, who had maintained her composure through the explanation and through the margin notes and through the reading of the 17 words, finally let it go. Not dramatically, just a break at the edges. The kind of break that happens when the thing you have been carrying for 6 weeks finally has a place to land. She pressed both hands flat on the desk. She looked at the script. She told Carson she owed Marilyn something she could not repay, that she had been saying for 15 years that this role found her. It did not find her. Marilyn chose her, stood aside and pointed and said, "This is hers," and Audrey had walked through the door without knowing who had opened it. She looked at him. She said she wanted someone to know. She wanted it said out loud, because Marilyn was not there to say it herself, and the least Audrey could do was make sure it was not forgotten. The Tonight Show ran 14 minutes over its scheduled runtime that night. NBC received no calls about the overrun. The calls that began coming in at 11:49 Eastern Time, before the broadcast had ended on the West Coast, were a different kind of call. People calling to say they had been watching. People calling to say they had needed to hear something true at 11 o'clock on a Monday night, and had found it. The switchboard stayed busy until past 2 in the morning. The following morning, photographs of Audrey Hepburn holding the script appeared on front pages across the country. The Breakfast at Tiffany's screenplay, with the handwritten margins and the 17 words at the bottom of the last page, was donated to the Academy Museum of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It arrived in a plain cardboard box with a handwritten note from Audrey Hepburn. She wrote that it belonged to the public, that it always had, that it had simply taken a long time to get there. It is in a glass case now. If you visit the Academy Museum in Los Angeles, you can stand in front of it and read the margin notes, and the underlinings, and the small stars next to certain lines of dialogue. You can see the place on page 34, where the pen went slightly through the paper from the force of the writing. You can see the circled lines on page 67, circled 3 times, with the single word "yes" written next to them. You can read, on the last page, in a handwriting that is steadier and more deliberate than the margin notes, the 17 words that Marilyn Monroe wrote in the spring of 1960. Holly is Audrey. Holly has always been Audrey. I know who I am enough to know that. Johnny Carson kept a photograph of that last page in his desk for the remainder of his career. When he retired from The Tonight Show in 1992, it was one of the last things he took from his office. He kept it, he said, as a reminder of what the job was actually for. He said, in the quiet of that final afternoon, that people spend so much time talking about performance, about craft, about the technique of what goes on under the light, and then someone comes in and shows you that the most important thing was the thing that happened in a hotel bathroom, with the door closed that nobody saw, a moment 2 women kept private for 18 years. And that moment, he said, was the whole story. That moment was the entire thing. Audrey Hepburn was asked in a 1988 interview whether the revelation on Carson's stage had changed how she thought about her career. She said it changed how she thought about generosity. Real generosity, the kind that cost the person something. She said she had always believed the role found her because she was the right fit, that the universe had arranged itself in her direction. She knew now that a person had arranged it, a person who could have taken it for herself and chose not to. Not out of indifference, out of clarity. She saw something clearly, about herself and about Audrey, and she acted on what she saw. And Audrey had walked through the door she held open and called it luck. She said she had been thinking ever since, about whether she had ever done that for anyone. Opened a door and stepped back and let someone else walk through. She was still thinking about it. Marilyn Monroe never saw Breakfast at Tiffany's in a cinema. She saw it once at a private screening in November of 1961, alone. She told the projectionist, when he came to check on her, that the actress was perfect, exactly right. And then she sat in the empty screening room for a long time and did not write anything down. Some things are complete enough to require no annotation. If you have watched this channel for any length of time, you may have come to think of these stories as stories about famous people doing extraordinary things. But that is not what they are. They are stories about private decisions that nobody witnessed, made in quiet rooms, that changed the direction of things. Marilyn Monroe did not change cinema by performing the role she was offered. She changed it by stepping back from it. She did not change Audrey Hepburn's life by appearing in it. She changed it by disappearing from it, by writing 17 words in a margin, in a private room, alone, with nobody watching. Before you leave, if you have been enjoying this channel and you have not yet become a member, consider joining. Members are the reason these stories exist. Your support makes it possible to keep telling them. The link is below in the description. And if this story moved you, there is one thing I want to ask before you go. There is someone in your life who stepped back at a crucial moment, so you could step forward. Someone who saw a door and decided it was yours, and not theirs, and never told you. Someone who wrote your name in a margin somewhere, privately, and then stepped away without taking credit. You may never know who they are. You may never receive an envelope in the mail. But if you do know, if there is someone in your life who gave you something by not taking it themselves, tell them. You do not need a television stage. You do not need 300 people in a studio. You just need to say the words, the way Audrey Hepburn said them in April of 1975, with a script in her hand and a 15-year debt she had finally found a place to put. Subscribe so you never miss these stories. Share this with someone who has opened a door for you and stepped back, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Has anyone ever given you something the way Marilyn Monroe gave Audrey Hepburn a role? Has anyone ever made you possible in a way you did not know about until later? We want to hear it. This is what we are here for. Not the lights, not the performance. The thing that happens in the quiet room when nobody is watching, that changes everything.